No Box Dance presents Dance Behind the Screen, process production, and social media. Don't forget, say no to the box. Dile no a la caja. 고정관념 미란 상자에서 벗어나세요.
Welcome back to Dance Behind the Screen podcast. This is your host, Marthea. In season 6, our theme is dance and technology. Our goal this season is to talk about how dance can coexist in a world of screens, social media, and interactive and immersive environments. Our guest, Erica Gionfriddo, is the co-area head of dance and an assistant professor of practice at the University of Texas at Austin, and is the co-founder of ARCOS Dance. Welcome to our show, EG.
Thank you for having me, Marthea.
Can you briefly introduce yourself and maybe talk a little bit about your relationship with dance and technology?
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. I go by EG these days. My pronouns are they, them. And I'm calling in from the colonized city-state known as Austin, Texas. So neighbors for you. And I would say the best way to introduce myself to this conversation would be to start with my pretty expansive definition of technology, one that's been evolving over the last 10, 15 years of artistic experimentation. And I really think of technology as anything that shifts or alters or adds to our maybe first state of being. So I'm thinking about language as technology. I think about dance training as a technology. And of course, digital and invisible networks and social media and video are maybe the more obvious go-to definitions of that. But as my artistic experimentation has really spiraled in many directions, I find myself really interested in things like technology of self and the way we construct our own identities can be considered a technology practice. Maybe that's enough for the beginning of the podcast. We can go from there.
Maybe you could talk a little bit about the company, and then I want to dive into more on the work you do with ARCOS.
Yeah, I noticed when you emailed, you kind of pulled from our website. What we're going by now is a multi-inter-trans anti-disciplinary group. And that's an intentional title. And I think related to the way I'm thinking about technology, that we're not really in a place to settle into one of those veins. And I think any of those prefixes conjure up an idea of what our work is and people can immediately understand it. And I think as ARCOS has evolved over the last, since 2011, we have evolved so many times and our interest and focus keeps shifting that it feels right now appropriate to just hold all of those quote unquote labels to try to elbow our space in what we're making.
I think my first time that I was familiar with ARCOS, and please correct me if I'm wrong, I believe it was at like 254 Dance Fest or something in Waco. And I think we were like watching something on our phones and it was a dancer and maybe you can explain this better, but I remember sitting there, we were prompted to, I think it was scan a QR code. And then we started watching this mover in a parking garage or something like that. And then next thing you know, you're watching them and they evolve into the physical space, the performance space that we were in. Is that correct? Am I describing this work right?
I think so. Yeah. I think maybe the version you saw, if it was at 254 Fest, there actually wasn't a live dancer there, but I love that you remember it that way in your brain.
Maybe I was hoping that was going to happen next or something.
Okay. So that experiment came out of one of my co-director, Elliot Gray Fisher, has a background in film, among many other things, music and technology among them. So we had been making some dance films from the beginning of our time together as a company. And we had this short little film that we had done, in a parking garage with a single dancer. And we had just purchased like a gimbal for the first time. And so we were just like, how many ways can we use this? So we did a single take video. So that was the trick of that video, is that it was all continuous film. And what happened in the theater, and this is very practical because we actually couldn't participate live, but we were invited to be part of the festival. And we're like, okay, we exist in multiple spaces. We work in the virtual and the physical. What would you think about this? And I think it was Brooke Schlechte, who was still running at that time. She was like, absolutely. What do you want to do? So we sent this video piece and there, you're right. There was a QR code that the audience scanned. and you were watching the film on your phone, but we sent an audio track. So the audio track was a slow creep. So at the beginning, it was maybe in silence, and then it evolved to a very immersive soundscape in there, which might have felt like a physical presence. That was a really fun little experiment just to see, oh, there are multiple ways to participate, even in things like a short form dance festival.
I feel like the work you're doing is really interesting, and working with so many different mediums, like you mentioned, how you're using the word technology, which is really intriguing and I think really important to our conversation this season about dance and technology, especially working in this way before COVID. I think through COVID, as we talked about a lot on this show, it forced many shifts for a lot of different organizations and art makers to create in kind of these outside of the box ways. But I love that my memory of your company and when I became familiar with ARCOS was way before COVID times, and you were already thinking outside of the box in that way. And as you mentioned in my preparation for this interview, you do define ARCOS as a multi-trans anti-disciplinary group. And I'm quoting, using dance and technology to imagine new possible futures. And you primarily create via a method of hacking or repurposing everyday technologies into performance. And I'm wondering, could you talk to me about, one, what are the technologies that you're working with? You've mentioned thinking of words as technology, some of the digital technologies as a technology. And then I'm also wondering if you could unpack the term of hacking for us, which is a very common term when it comes to working in the digital space, but I haven't seen it in a way to talk about art making and art sharing. So yeah, I'd love to hear more on maybe both those topics.
Yeah, I think our fascination remains with like ubiquitous everyday technologies, like the things that are in our hands and in front of our faces every day. Like those are the places that we want to get inside and reframe and pull apart inside of our art making.
Can I pause you there? Could you talk about maybe why that's of interest to you and why that might be important?
Sure. This is such a good question. Okay, I have two ways to answer it. The first one is to go way back to the beginning of ARCOS in 2011. And we started, like many young companies do, thinking we're going to be a touring concert rep company and we're going to make work all the time and we're going to go place to place. And it was right around that time that like some of the major modern dance companies were folding or changing shape, and like the dance scene, like the ground was moving under us. And we're like, okay, so the thing that we knew growing up is already shifting. There's no sense in hopping on that train. So what's the different thing? So we pretty quickly embraced like what we were calling multimedia at that time, not knowing really what that meant. We had not done a ton of research about other companies that were doing that. And the act of just experimenting without having a reference really opened up a new mode for us. And then from there, of course, we like enriched our research and connected and found a very rich lineage. But that kind of initial impetus to be like, okay, what's after this? The thing that exists is maybe no longer working, or it's already on its way to shifting. So how can we anticipate or invent for ourselves what it is we want to do next? So we were from the very beginning working with a very small budget. We were a small team of makers, but we had a lot of experience in different mediums. So from the very beginning, we were interested in using technology towards anti-spectacle, or not just, oh, this motion tracker can do this thing and it can project an image behind us, but really, why are we using that, or what are we infusing it with? So I think a lot of that comes from my co-director's background in theater and narrative and wanting to create a connection and with the audience and have something that they can follow. So that's one place to start, where like from the very beginning, it wasn't about chasing the newest, flashiest, most impressive, quote unquote, trendy device out there, but really taking what we had at hand and transforming it and using the content or the thematic research to really look at those things differently.
You are listening to Nowbox Dance.
What are the technologies that you're interested in working with now?
Yeah, so we've been in a deep hole with live streaming video for many years now, since 2016. This deep spiral with live streaming videos since this small dance festival with Big Rig Dance Co-op in Denton back in 2016. And this was right after Instagram and Facebook introduced the live streaming feature. So it was brand new. No one really knew what to do with it yet. And for us, like one of my first introductions to it, little content warning here about police violence, was the murder of Philando Castile was like my first introduction to what live streaming video could do. So I wasn't looking at like makeup tutorials. My first introduction was this horrendous human act that really catapulted me in many directions. One of them being, okay, what is this live streaming feature? What is it doing to us in our relationship to one another? And if it is changing our relationship to one another in some way, what's our responsibility with that new access and information? So the best way for me to do that was to experiment with it as an artist to understand and get inside of what this mechanism is. So the art making has been like a deep dive into how does this live streaming video, which takes on many different forms, how does it allow us to see ourselves differently? What are we considering? How are we considering our relationship to quote unquote performance as we're doing that, which can be taken on or off the stage? And so that was really a catalyst, and it has stuck with me for the last 8+ years of that experimentation. And it keeps revealing to me more depths about how I'm considering the ways my own body moves through space in and outside of performance, how I'm relating to other people. And then more recently, with our more interactive work, watching other people have the same discoveries has been a whole new level of discovery.
Could you talk to me about the use of the word hackers and kind of your thoughts on why you're using that word? And I guess and maybe you could talk a little bit about, I don't know if you want to call them like audience or participants or those who experience the work of what are you hoping to create for them, or what do you hope their takeaways are after experiencing your work?
Yeah, thanks for saying the word participant. I love that word. We definitely want audiences to not passively consume, but actually be implicated and maybe affect the work in some way, which just has a different embodied experience. You remember it differently. Like I'm already thinking about you explaining that piece that you saw at Waco Fest. Because you were involved in even a limited capacity, it really transformed your memory of what that work was. I lost the thread of the question. Hackers. Yes. Yeah. So true to form, we've actually been toying around with a new word. We've been playing around with interchanging hacking with rewiring the last few, 6 months or so, just to try it out and see how it feels, which kind of has its own implications. But the original idea of the word hacking came from a version of this ongoing Ether series that we've been experimenting with since that Denton Dance Festival in 2016. And our working definition of that has come to be repurposing everyday technologies for other than their intended use. So I know that hackers conjures up an image of computer hackers in the 90s and the green text on the black screen and breaking the mail code or whatever and robbing the bank. So it's not really following that lineage. So I think that's also why we're maybe going down the rewiring path. But it comes from a lot of my graduate study in cyborg theory and queer theory. It really inspired me to think about technology not at face value, but be able to go under the hood, quoting Sherry Turkle here, to be able to go under the hood of how these platforms, devices are actually constructed and how they work so that we can maybe bend them to our will a little bit more, or at least not have to follow the accepted or the targeted consumer-based ways that these platforms actually want us to engage with them. So hacking is an ability to look at more than surface value and maybe turn the platform on its head or turn the device in a different direction, for us usually towards more embodiment and connection, which is not inherently what most of these devices want to do.
Yeah, and that's such important work, I think. I was recently talking with my team about this, that continued emergence of so many new technologies takes you more and more out of your body, and you're spending more and more time, or I'm spending more and more time on my phone, on my computer, still connecting to people, but it feels more disconnected in a way too than when you're face to face with somebody. So I think that's just like such important work, especially to show how maybe different avenues or different ways you can work with these technologies in order to connect or to reach some other goal that maybe not might be the intended purpose of Meta or the creators or something like that.
Yeah. And I think it's been important in all of that work to not create our own binary around it, because I know at the beginning of the pandemic, for sure, everyone was like, this is awful. This is not connection. And it was such a hard stop for so many people. And like you said, we had been experimenting in this realm for a long time before that. So it was very surreal to all of a sudden watch everyone try to figure out live streaming and how do I make dance in a box on a square with a lag. It was I had a very different entree into the pandemic than most folks did. But for me, it's not about what technology is good and what technology is bad. And technology has the ability to create amazing connection and bring so much access to so many people. I've learned a lot from disability politics in this area, that there are forms of technology that we might say is less than an face-to-face interaction that is the only means of connection for some people. And the ability, now that everyone's on Zoom and we can do virtual meetings, like the access that has granted for folks living with a disability or chronic illness, like it's been incredible that we've, to some degree at least, embraced the fact that we don't always have to physically go somewhere to be present and be connected with each other.
We've talked about this big umbrella term of technology, and I want to dig a little bit deeper into social media specifically. And you mentioned kind of the implications and the impact that live streaming and Facebook Live had on your art making. Are there other shifts in social media that have influenced your approach to art making and sharing?
Such a slippery question. I know so many people. Okay, so I also work in higher education, so I'm around young people who are getting younger than me every year, which is really interesting. And I feel like I've already witnessed a cycle in folks' relationship to social media, in that it was this thing that everyone had to be a part of, and then they were resisting it, and they recognized that it was detrimental, to now they do it, but they're ambivalent about it because they've never known anything else. So it doesn't carry quite the same amount of weight I think it does for a generation before them. So it's just interesting to follow those cycles and see how different groups of people are embracing or rejecting what it does. I think maybe the only way to answer that is indirectly, where this social media in particular has been a big site of experimentation for this Ether series with ARCOS. First as that site of, oh, this is terrible, it's totally disembodied, and how do we even navigate this, and what is it doing to us? To looking a little bit to the left and being like, okay, what are the possibilities here? To really embracing the ways that we do have agency over these platforms. And for a long time, many projects in this series I would ask performers to create their own Instagram account, like a project account. And we would play around with what's the content that you're interacting with, who do you talk to, what hashtags and profiles do you follow? Because you really can tailor what happens in that space. And we would try to, okay, what are the parts of your identity that you maybe don't express all the time, or maybe you don't feel as integrated into your forward facing personality, or definitely not the personality that you would put on your quote main Instagram account or whatever. And just see, like, how can we affirm those parts of ourselves through the content, through the algorithm? It takes a little bit of work. It definitely does, but I've been on the receiving end of that personally, where following different sort of social change figures, queer folks, and other experimental artists had really shifted the context that was coming my way. And I will admit that, like, Instagram was the first place of affirming my gender identity and being able to find other people affirming the things that I wasn't ready to talk about offline yet. And so I think about that a lot in the ways that we have to train people how to do that, because that's not the way that it is designed to work. But if we can, again, go under the hood and empower people to think about, oh, I'm the one with the agency here. And yes, I have to fight through ads and stuff like that, but I really can go in and even now I can go into my Instagram feed, and if I'm feeling a little disconnected from like my artist self, where are all my cyborg people on Instagram, and go interact with them, can save a few things, and then my feed repopulates. Or if I'm feeling particularly like in a regression state with body dysmorphia, I can go in and have some trusted like ED recovery folks on Instagram, and I can go in and interact with those things, and it feeds back to me. And that's not necessarily something that I can have access to in my immediate circles all the time. So I think that was a very circuitous way to explain that. So social media can change our relationship to ourselves as much as we are thinking about our presentation outward. We can repurpose that, rewire that, or hack that to help us understand or discover other parts of ourselves.
Yeah. And I think that's such an important point, is the awareness of the agency that we have. And I think that is perhaps like a missing link for so many people. I have a similar experience. It's once I found out I was pregnant, I'm Googling or researching things about having kids. Yeah. It's like my whole feed became about kid stuff, baby stuff. You need 1 million products to be a successful parent, things like that. But having a background in technology and things like that, I'm like, okay, I can reshift what I'm getting in my feed. It doesn't need to be focused only on all the products I need to be a successful parent. I can, like you said, reconnect with my artist side and even have like inspirational quotes and things like that, which I think is really important. But it really goes down to that awareness of the agency that we do have when we're engaging with the platforms. And I think that seems to be a very like common thread throughout a lot of our conversations around social media on the podcast. Is it good or bad is a question you're going to get later in the episode. But at the end of the day, it is just a tool. So like any tool, like a toothbrush, how are you using it to affect your life?
Yeah. And agency and awareness are such powerful concepts. And I'm glad you said those words, because for us, like you might be able to look at that like hacking the algorithm or curating your algorithm towards that as a little superfluous or whatever. It could feel kind of surface level, even though sometimes it cuts really deep. But like the skill that we're practicing in doing that is first of all, creating awareness around like what this thing actually does and how it works. And then asserting our agency with it, that we don't have to just passively consume what the thing wants us to do that. And those are transferable skills. And I really believe that being able, if I can do that on my Instagram profile, that's a learned, embodied skill that I can take somewhere else in my life that needs that kind of attention. And so I'm thinking about small things about like agencies in relationships or working through conflict. I'm thinking about social movements. I'm thinking about empowering people to even stand up for themselves in a dance studio when something doesn't feel right. Like I can understand how this is working. I see that it's not what I am comfortable with. And so I have agency to think about it differently or move differently through something. So that's, again, the reason that we want our audiences to participate in the work and not just consume the work, is because even at a cellular level, at some deep subconscious or embodied level, they're practicing a skill that can help them or can help us all create some change elsewhere outside of the performance itself.
Don't forget to say no to the box.
As you mentioned before, you're working inside of academia. You're seeing many generations of people exploring new technologies, old technologies, having opinions on things, but also needing to get careers and do something with their degrees outside of school. So I'm wondering if you have any advice or tips for navigating the continuous development of new technologies and this pressure that I personally think exists, especially on social media, to stay relevant, or the big word right now, it feels like this year is your work innovative? Like, I feel like every grant application I get is, how is your work innovative? So yeah, if you could talk a little bit about that, and maybe the advice you give to your students could be transferable for myself and for our listeners.
Yeah, it's so true. Yeah, I hate that word innovative almost as much as I really don't like the word authenticity either. Yes. It's another podcast. I'm like, what do you actually mean when you say that? Yeah, I think the advice that I give my students is similar to what we were just talking about, is awareness and agency, is that these are tools to help you tell your story to people who don't know you yet. So like I was thinking about in my upper division choreography class that I lead in the spring, we also do a little bit of professional development, portfolio work. And in the past, I used to have them create some sort of website or digital portfolio, and we're trying to move that out of the choreography class and give it its own space. But even with things like they have to create a bio, a resume, and an artist statement. And these are all done with language, and they're done in a very particular way. But these three things together tell your story, and you get to decide the shape that they take. So like that's transferable knowledge to, okay, how do I want to represent myself on social media? How do I want to create a website, or what information goes in what places? I think sometimes, particularly for emerging artists and young artists, there's a pressure to be like, I have to have it all figured out and I have to put it all in one spot so everyone can see it. And that's not how life goes, right? It's not even how a grant application goes. Like they're going to look at 7 different materials to piece a story together about who you are. And you have the agency over how and where those pieces of the puzzle are revealed, or how they look, or how people interact with them. I did have a student just this year, just like lamenting the fact that it seems impossible to even get a fair audition these days, or to join a company if you don't have a certain social media presence. And in fact, there are some companies that are really favoring dancers with large Instagram, TikTok followings because they want that to somehow cash into the company. And it's so outrageous. And I really empathize with this student who is a brilliant dancer and is not on social media, like by choice. And so feeling like, oh, am I totally screwing myself here by not participating? And I don't know. I don't quite know the answer to that definitively, but I think there's a possibility for each of us every day, every generation that comes around to shift where the weight is in that balance and figure out what's the next way to connect with people. Yeah, I think that's my biggest advice, is that just because that's the way it is doesn't mean that's the only way it can operate. And you are smart enough as a dancer to invent or imagine some other way of this system working. Like this system can be shifted if we are aware of it and assert our agency over it.
Do you have any practical tips, like things that you think are important to have if you do have a social media or a website? Or do you have like, maybe you could give us 3 to 5 like practical tips we could take and apply right away?
Okay, great. Yeah. So let's bring it down from the theoretical. Let's get into it. Practically
well, I think
speaking,
both are important.
Yes, totally. Yeah. So sometimes I forget. Practically speaking, I want all of my students to know how to work with, film, record, and edit video. I teach a dance for camera class here. We also work on reels. I want them to understand how to do that. Basic understanding of digital images, video or photos. For me, I'm always like, sometimes we have to start at the very beginning. Like, how does your computer operate? Like, where's your hard drive? What's a hard drive? What's an external hard drive? It's amazing the things that that have become, again, we've been unable to go under the hood with the newer evolutions of personal computers, so that like dancers young folks interacting with it don't even know, like, how do I find that thing that I just downloaded? Like sometimes we're at that level of just teaching practical etiquette. Like, how do I work with this thing? I think I have heard, like, even more recent in the last few years, like maybe in the last 3 years or so, that LinkedIn is a hot place, like even for dance jobs. So it doesn't take much to fill that out. But again, you can choose the degree to which you're using any of these platforms. I also think I think building a personal website is a great exercise in self-definition and self-actualization. You really get to express and visually express the way that you want to present in the world. And with all of the platforms that are free and easy to use, like, you can change your whole artistic identity at any time if you wanted to. Yeah, those are some big ones. Yeah, learn video, learn basic photography, play around with a website, and remember that all of these things are telling your story together.
That's great. And I really love how you're emphasizing, how do you want to tell your story, wherever it may be. I want to talk a little bit more about what you're seeing in higher education, and particularly AI in the classroom. Have you seen a lot of people submitting papers that maybe ChatGPT wrote, or do you have any tips for other dance educators who want to integrate these exciting, important new digital technologies, but they also want to create parameters and frameworks that leave room for original thought and creativity and clear-ish definitions of like intellectual property and things like that.
Oh man. Okay. I definitely have had some of those walk down the hall and be like, will you read this? This is ChatGPT, right? This was not from this person. So I think being in dance education, maybe my opportunities to have to even be aware of that are smaller or fewer than if I were teaching in an English department or in some other more writing heavy kind of program. But it even is appearing here. And I think to this point in my realm of higher education, I haven't been like too pressed about it. I think it's easy to spot if students are doing it. And then that's an opening and an opportunity to be like, okay, what was it about this assignment that made you just copy paste from somewhere else? And there's usually some deeper reason going on around capacity or imposter syndrome or feeling like maybe they don't understand or they don't know how to place this in their priorities of other work or something like that. So I think what we have an advantage over as dance educators is that we can always create a more creative assignment. So maybe it is true that a 2-page performance review is not the best way for young students to integrate what they learned or thought or form an opinion about a work that they saw. Maybe they do need more embodied practices about how to reflect or synthesize or do their research. And I think we're poised to do that. And there might be requirements or pressures from the institution that academic rigor and all of that has to look a certain way. But that's also a system that we can get inside and start to shift the balance and really work towards and advocate for other modes of embodied research. I also find that I sometimes find that I'm introducing these to students before they've really encountered them or would think to use them. And maybe that's just like the small cross section of students that I'm working with. They're not out there like figuring out how to cheat at their work or like how to do it differently. So that's been interesting because I'm up on some of the trends or things that people are trying to use to hack the system in their own way by using these systems and be like, okay, what do you think about it? And how is this advancing any of your other objectives, or is it just to get it done? And I think that's one of the other big, maybe definitions of technology or understandings of technology is that all technologies were created or came about to make something easier for us. Like ideally, all of these technologies are freeing us from some sort of labor that we could be placing elsewhere. So yeah, if you need to synthesize 4 different papers or read 4 different plays, like ChatGPT can do that and synthesize and spit back out to you a summary of things. Great. I actually don't have time to read all of those things, but I'm curious and I want to know. So it again comes back to agency and awareness. Are you now taking what ChatGPT tells you as truth, or are you going to also look at it as like another person that's maybe fallible and you might want to do some back research on it? So I'm all for the ways that technology can lessen the load or make things easier. And there's the other side of that, of making sure that we're retaining our agency and not giving up our creative agency over some of these situations.
How do you say no to the box? That's our tagline here at No Box Dance.
I love that tagline. I think I have my resistance to the box is both a relentless commitment to the small and thinking about what's starting with the smallest form of connection or movement or impetus to really understand where something is coming from rather than trying to expand. And then I think also, like it says it in our first line on our website, is resisting categories. And I love language. I love finding words that really land in your body. And all of a sudden you like realize some deep truth about yourself because of words that came together. And then there are also ways that those words just as quickly can become super limiting. So I think being in interdisciplinary, anti-disciplinary. I can't even say the whole thing because I want it to be work. I want to still work at understanding what it is that I'm doing.
Flash 4.
For our last segment, we have our Flash 4, which is where we ask all our guests to answer 4 questions in a flash, so as fast as possible. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay. If you had to recommend a resource to our audience, what would it be?
Glitch Feminism by Legacy Russell book. Amazing. Get it.
That's hilarious. One of our other guests this season recommended that book as well.
It's so good. Reading that book made me think I could write a book. So
it was on my list, but now that you said it, Carrie and Shan said it, I definitely need to download it.
It's the one. Do it. Yeah.
What was the first dance you saw?
Oh God, I don't know. I can't answer that one quickly. It was probably some musical theater thing from my childhood, but I didn't really get into dance because I saw dance. I got into dance because I was invited to a class at a kind of pre-professional conservatory, and I was like, whoa, this is hard and I'm interested. So I don't know what the first dance I saw was.
Do you think social media has a positive influence on the dance world? Yes or no?
I think I'd have to put it along a spectrum and not a binary, and I can't answer it fully.
What is your favorite social media platform?
Ooh, I would say a highly curated Instagram feed.
Create, discuss, and advocate for art. No box dance.
I have loved having you on our show, EG. We talked about a lot of different things. And my biggest takeaway from our conversation is just the importance of agency in working with digital technologies. And I feel like I need some time to almost journal after this conversation and reflect on where are the areas that I am taking great agency when it comes to working with digital technologies in life in general. And maybe there's some areas where I can improve upon my agency, or maybe I'm being a little bit too passive of a consumer than I would like to be.
I love that. Yeah. What a beautiful takeaway. And I think if we're holding that framework as we move through life, we start to see all of the systems that we might want to get inside or shift or change.
Mm-hmm. Can share a little bit more about I don't know how it's pronounced. The intensive with ARCOS. Could you talk a little bit about that and maybe how our listeners could register?
Absolutely. Speaking of words and language, it's an unintensive because it's an intensive that is restorative. It's not intense. It's untensive. Yeah.
I love it.
So this is our 4th annual Untensive. It's a virtual gathering that we co-produce with a group called Practice Progress based out of LA. Kai Hazelwood and Sarah Ashkin are embodied anti-racist facilitators, and they work with a lot of the dance world, a lot of big dance organizations and higher ed dance programs. They have curated this wonderful 4-day virtual gathering to do some of this deep thinking about systems and our personal relationship to change. So this is our 4th time go around with it. The online format is very intentional, even in this age where folks are trying to forget that access is still not possible for a lot of people. So it's a safe gathering. And this year we have 2 streams. The first is embodied anti-racist practice, where we work in race-based affinity groups, because the work of looking at systems is very different depending on how you move through the world. And then we have a stream called Creative Worlding, which has a whole roster of amazing guest artists that come in and offer some kind of radical provocations about how to be an artist in this moment. And our tagline this year is apocalyptic imagining. And so we're really thinking about, yes, we are living in the apocalypse. And so how are we harnessing the power of the apocalypse to imagine and move forward into our own future? And it's happening virtually. And you can register at arcosdance.com. And there's tons of information about both of those streams, all the guest artists, including a very intentional tuition formats that really gives you the agency over how you're investing your money and your presence in the programming.
Wonderful. And we'll link it out in our show notes for everybody who's interested in more details. And I just wanted to say thank you, EG, for coming on our show and for the important work that you're doing. I feel like it's so meaningful just what you're offering and the spaces and the intentionality behind what you're creating, what you're sharing. And I just really appreciate, again, the specific languaging that you're using around what's important to you, what's important to ARCOS, and how it can affect us as we continue to move and exist in this world. What's the best way that our listeners can stay connected with you and ARCOS?
Yeah, you can follow us on Instagram at ARCOS Dance. We also have a website that it functions as a website, as an archive. So if you're curious, you can go down the rabbit hole with us there. We're also on Vimeo. You can see some old samples and things like that. So those are the best places.
Thanks again, EG. I really loved this conversation and getting to talk with you more and getting to know you.
My pleasure. Thank you. And just thank you for creating this podcast. And I have assigned some episodes to students in classes sometimes, especially choreography classes. So it's really cool to see how, your commitment to the form and how far it's come in just a short time.
I appreciate that. When you said that, I was so excited. Our team was like, yay!
Dance Behind the Screen podcast is produced by No Box Dance, an art service organization that creates, collaborates, and discusses art with artists and the public. Dance Behind the Screen podcast is co-hosted by Azaria Hogans, Raina Mondragon, Marthea Nygaard, and Yejin Choi, with sound designed by Daniel Rosas.
Thanks for taking your time to tune into Dance Behind the Screen, a bi-monthly interview series where we go behind the screen to question process, product, and social media. Be sure to follow us on social media at KNOW Box Dance. See you next time, and don't forget to say no to the box.